The piercing sound of gunfire echoed through the Montana wilderness, causing Faith Foster to duck her head as she urged her horse faster across the unforgiving terrain. It was 1875, and the life she'd known in Boston had vanished like morning dew under a scorching western sun. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she glanced over her shoulder, the distant riders still visible against the horizon. They weren't giving up, they never did. Faith's golden hair had fallen loose from its carefully arranged pins, whipping wildly around her face as she pushed her exhausted mare forward. 2 days on the run, and still they pursued her. The letters in her saddlebag felt like they weighed 100 pounds evidence that could expose the corruption threatening to destroy her family's legacy. But it wasn't just the letters they wanted, it was her silence. "Come on, girl," Faith whispered to her horse, the animal's labored breathing matching her own. Just a little further. The landscape stretched endlessly before her, a vast expanse of wilderness that seemed determined to swallow her whole. She'd left everything behind: her family's mansion, her planned marriage to a banking heir, the comfort of civilization, all because she'd discovered the truth about her father's business partners. As dusk settled across the land, the temperature dropped sharply. Faith had no choice but to find shelter. The distant lights of what appeared to be a small settlement offered her first hope in days. She'd run out of food that morning, and her canteen held only a mouthful of water. The mare beneath her was stumbling with fatigue. The settlement turned out to be little more than a cluster of buildings: a general store, a saloon, and a few scattered homes. Hope Springs, according to the weathered sign that creaked in the evening breeze. Faith hesitated at the edge of town, knowing her pursuers could be close behind. But the choice had been made for her. She couldn't continue without rest and supplies. She dismounted outside the general store, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. The door opened before she reached it, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the warm light inside. "Miss, you all right?" The voice was deep, concerned, with a distinct western drawl. Faith tried to respond, but exhaustion claimed her. The world tilted sideways, and she felt herself falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the dirt. "Whoa there," the man said, easily supporting her weight. "Let's get you inside." When Faith regained consciousness, she found herself lying on a cot in a small back room. A lantern cast dancing shadows on the wall, and the scent of coffee hung in the air. She bolted upright, panic flooding her system. "My horse, my bag." "Your mare's been fed and watered," came the same deep voice from before. "And your belongings are right there." Faith turned toward the voice. The man sitting in a wooden chair beside her cot was perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark hair curled slightly at his collar, and a few days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. He wasn't dressed like the businessmen she knew in Boston. This man wore a faded chambray shirt, well-worn denim pants, and dusty boots. A cowboy's hat hung on a peg near the door. "Who are you?" She managed to ask. "Preston Steele," he replied, offering a tin cup of water. "I run the general store here in Hope Springs." Faith accepted the cup with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Steele. Most folks call me Prees," he said with a slight smile, "and you would be." She hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger with her real name. "Faith," she finally answered, omitting her surname. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. "Well, Faith, you look like you've been riding hard. Trouble following you?" The directness of his question startled her. "What makes you say that?" "Been out west long enough to recognize the look," he replied, setting his coffee cup down. "Plus, ladies traveling alone through this territory typically have a good reason." Faith took another sip of water, weighing her options. This man had helped her when he could have left her in the dust. "Yes," she admitted. "There are men following me, dangerous men." Preston nodded, unsurprised. "Figured as much. This town's small enough that strangers stand out. If someone comes looking, people will notice." "I can't stay long," Faith said, attempting to rise. A wave of dizziness forced her back down. "You're not going anywhere tonight," Preston said firmly. "You need food and rest. Whatever's chasing you can wait until morning." Faith wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. She was exhausted, hungry, and in no condition to continue her journey. Just until dawn, she conceded. Preston brought her a bowl of hearty stew and more water. As she ate, he kept his questions minimal, sensing her reluctance to share details. When she finished, he showed her to a small bedroom above the store. "My quarters are down the hall," he explained. "Door locks from the inside. Sleep as long as you need." Faith thanked him again, surprised by his kindness to a complete stranger. In Boston, such behavior would have been highly suspicious, but out here in the wilderness, perhaps the rules of civilization bent differently. Once alone, Faith retrieved the letters from her saddlebag, examining them by lamplight. The evidence of fraud and bribery involving her father's firm and several government officials was all there, documented in her father's own hand. She discovered them by accident, never intending to uncover such corruption. When confronted, her father had insisted she forget what she'd seen. When she'd refused, threatening to take the evidence to the authorities, her family had turned on her. Her own brother had called in associates to handle the situation. Faith returned the letters to their hiding place and crawled into bed, bone-weary but unable to quiet her mind. She'd been raised in luxury and privilege, sheltered from the harsher realities of life. Now she was a fugitive, pursued by men who wouldn't hesitate to silence her permanently. Her family had effectively written her off as dead or worse, a traitor to their name and fortune. Morning came too quickly. Faith woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of a small town coming to life. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to stay here, in this tiny settlement far from the corruption of Boston society. But the fantasy shattered when she remembered the danger at her heels. She dressed quickly and descended the stairs to find Preston opening the store for the day. He looked up when she entered, a smile warming his features. "You look better," he observed. "Sleep well?" "As well as could be expected," Faith replied. "I need to be moving on." Preston gestured to a pot of coffee and some bread on a small table. "Eat something first. Your mare needed more rest than you did. I've had the blacksmith checking her shoes." Faith accepted the food gratefully. "You're very kind, Mr. Steele," "Please," he corrected, "and it's nothing. We look out for each other out here. City folk don't always understand that." She smiled despite herself. "Is it that obvious I'm from the city?" "Everything about you screams Eastern refinement," he said with a chuckle. "But don't worry, your secret's safe with me." As Faith ate, customers began trickling into the store. Preston greeted each by name, inquiring after family members or livestock with genuine interest. He moved with easy confidence, a man comfortable in his surroundings and his role in the community. Faith found herself watching him, intrigued by this life so different from her own. By mid-morning, she was ready to depart. Preston walked her to the livery where her refreshed mare waited. "Which way are you headed?" he asked as she checked her saddle. "West," she replied vaguely. "As far as I can get," he nodded, his expression thoughtful. "There's a ranch about 15 miles northwest of here. Friend of mine runs it. If you need a place to lay low for a while, tell him Prees sent you." Faith hesitated, touched by his continued assistance. "Why are you helping me?" "You don't even know me." Preston's eyes held hers steadily. "Sometimes a person just needs a chance. Whatever you're running from, I figure you've got your reasons." Before she could respond, a commotion at the edge of town caught their attention. 3 riders were approaching at a gallop, raising dust in their wake. Faith's blood ran cold as she recognized the lead rider, her brother's business associate, Thomas Harding. "Those the men after you?" Preston asked quietly, his posture suddenly alert. Faith nodded, panic rising in her throat. "They can't find me here." Without hesitation, Preston took her arm. "This way, quickly." He led her behind the livery to a narrow alley between buildings, then through a back door into what appeared to be a storeroom. "Stay here," he instructed. "Don't make a sound." Faith pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering as Preston disappeared. Through a crack in the boards, she could see the 3 men dismounting in front of the general store. Thomas's voice carried clearly in the quiet town. "Looking for a young woman," he was saying. "Blonde, well-dressed. Riding alone, might have passed through yesterday." Faith couldn't hear the response, but moments later, she saw Preston emerge from the store, his stance casual but his eyes watchful. Haven't seen anyone matching that description, he said, loud enough for Faith to hear. Not much call for lone ladies to visit Hope Springs. Something happened to her, Thomas frowned. Family business, her folks are worried sick. Poor girl's not right in the head, wandered off with some important papers, her father's offering a substantial reward for her safe return. Faith clenched her fists, fury replacing fear. How dare they paint her as mentally unstable? It was a convenient lie to discredit anything she might say about the evidence she carried. That's so, Preston replied, sounding appropriately concerned. Well, if I see her, I'll be sure to send word. Which direction you boys headed next? Checking settlements to the south, Thomas answered. If you spot her, keep her here. Girl's been known to spin wild tales. Don't believe anything she tells you. The men remounted their horses, and Faith held her breath until the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance. A few minutes later, Preston appeared in the storeroom doorway. They're gone, he said, but they'll be back. They're splitting up to search nearby settlements. Faith emerged from her hiding place, shaking with anger and relief. Thank you, I should leave immediately. Preston shook his head. That's exactly what they'd expect. They'll be watching the trails. You need to stay put until they move on. I can't put you or this town in danger, Faith protested. You won't, Preston assured her, but I need to know what I'm dealing with. Those men claimed your family's looking for you, said you're not right in the head. Faith's cheeks flushed with indignation. Of course they'd say that. It's the easiest way to discredit me. Preston studied her face for a long moment. I believe you, but I need to understand what's at stake here. Faith hesitated, then made a decision. She trusted Preston with her life. She could trust him with the truth. She retrieved the letters from her saddlebag and handed them to him. My father's firm has been bribing government officials to secure railroad contracts, she explained as he examined the documents. They've been stealing land from settlers and native tribes, falsifying surveys and pocketing millions. When I found these letters and confronted my father, he tried to have me committed to an asylum, my own family. Her voice broke. Preston's expression darkened as he read. This is serious business, Faith. These men aren't just after the letters, they're after anyone who knows what's in them. My father called me lost, said I'd lost my mind, lost my way, lost my loyalty, Faith said bitterly. My mother couldn't even look at me, my brother. She swallowed hard. He's the one who sent those men after me. Preston handed the letters back. Family's supposed to protect their own, not hunt them down. I thought I knew them, Faith whispered. I was wrong. So what's your plan? Preston asked. Keep running, Faith straightened her shoulders. I'm taking these to a federal marshal in Helena. There's enough evidence here to bring down several prominent businessmen and at least 2 senators. Preston whistled softly. No wonder they want to stop you, he thought for a moment. Helena's a good 4 days' ride from here, maybe more in your condition. You'll need supplies, a different horse, maybe a disguise. You're suggesting I continue? Faith asked, surprised. I'm suggesting you finish what you started, Preston replied, but smart, not reckless. Those men think you're headed west. We'll send you north instead, through the mountains. I know those trails better than most. Faith repeated. You didn't think I'd let you go alone, did you? Preston smiled, though his eyes remained serious. Those men will kill you if they find you. I can't have that on my conscience. But your store, Jimmy Porter can mind it for a few days. He's been wanting more responsibility anyway. Preston's decision appeared final. We leave at dusk. I need to make arrangements. Faith watched in amazement as Preston efficiently prepared for their journey. He arranged for his young assistant to manage the store, gathered supplies, and procured a sturdy gelding for Faith to ride instead of her mare, which was too distinctive. By late afternoon, he transformed her appearance with simple but effective changes, cutting several inches from her hair, providing men's clothing that would make her less conspicuous from a distance, and showing her how to sit and ride like a ranch hand rather than a lady. As the sun began to set, they slipped out of town via a rarely used trail behind the livery. Faith felt a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration as they rode northward into the growing darkness. She'd never imagined herself on such an adventure, much less with a man she'd known for less than a day. Why are you really doing this? she asked as they made camp that first night in a sheltered ravine. "You're risking everything for a stranger." Preston stoked the small, nearly smokeless fire he'd built. "Let's just say I understand what it's like when family turns against you." Something in his tone suggested personal experience, but Faith didn't press. Everyone had their stories out here, that much she'd learned already. They traveled for 2 days through increasingly rugged terrain, Preston leading them on trails that barely existed. He proved to be an excellent guide, always aware of their surroundings and potential dangers. Each night they shared the campfire and increasingly their stories. Preston had come west after the war, leaving behind a wealthy Virginia family that had disowned him for refusing to fight for the Confederacy. He'd built his life from nothing, working cattle drives and mining camps before settling in Hope Springs 5 years earlier. "My father called me a traitor," he told Faith as they huddled near the fire on the third night, "said I was dead to them." "I'm sorry," Faith said softly. "It seems we both know what it's like to be branded as lost by those who should have stood by us." Preston's gaze met hers across the flames. "The difference is I never felt lost. Leaving that life behind was the first time I felt found." His words resonated deeply with Faith. Since fleeing Boston, despite the danger and hardship, she'd experienced moments of clarity and purpose unlike anything in her previous existence. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Leaving everything behind?" "Never," Preston answered without hesitation. "Some prices are worth paying for the truth." The connection between them deepened as they journeyed onward. Faith found herself noticing small things, the way Preston's eyes crinkled when he smiled, how he always checked her mount before his own each morning, the gentle way he'd help her over difficult terrain. For his part, Preston seemed increasingly drawn to Faith's courage and determination. On the 4th day, disaster struck. They'd been forced to cross a swollen stream, and Faith's horse had slipped on the rocks, sending her tumbling into the rushing water. Preston had pulled her to safety, but her saddlebag containing the precious letters had been swept away. "The evidence," Faith cried, watching helplessly as the current carried away her proof. "It's gone," Preston held her firmly by the shoulders. "We'll find it. The stream narrows about a 1/4 mile downstream. Things tend to catch there." They searched frantically, following the water's path until, miraculously, they spotted the saddlebag caught on a fallen tree. Preston waded in to retrieve it, the cold water soaking him to the chest. The letters inside were damp but largely intact, protected by the oiled leather of the bag. That evening, as they dried their belongings by the fire, Faith noticed Preston shivering despite the flames. "You're ill," she said, alarmed by the flush on his cheeks. "Just a chill," he dismissed. "I'll be fine by morning." But morning brought fever and a racking cough. Preston insisted they continue, but by midday, he could barely stay in the saddle. Faith, desperate with worry, spotted a small cabin in a clearing ahead and steered them toward it. The cabin proved to be a line shack used by cattlemen during seasonal roundups. It was abandoned but sound, with a small woodpile and basic provisions. Faith helped Preston inside and onto the single cot, her heart pounding with fear as his condition worsened. For 2 days she tended him, boiling willow bark for his fever and using the medical supplies from their packs. She hunted small game for broth, gathered herbs she recognized from her mother's garden, and prayed as she'd never prayed before. The realization that she couldn't bear to lose this man struck her with surprising force. On the 3rd morning, Preston's fever broke. Faith, exhausted from her vigil, had fallen asleep beside the cot, her head resting near his hand. She woke to feel his fingers gently stroking her hair. "Faith," he murmured, his voice weak but clear. "You stayed." She lifted her head, tears of relief filling her eyes. "Of course I stayed." "You could have continued to Helena," he pointed out. "Completed your mission." Faith shook her head. "Not without you." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since their first meeting. Preston's hand moved to cup her cheek, and Faith leaned into his touch, no longer caring about propriety or the conventions of her former life. "When I first saw you," Preston said softly, "stumbling into town half dead from exhaustion, I thought you were the bravest soul I'd ever encountered." These past days have only confirmed it. I wasn't brave, Faith corrected. I was terrified, I still am. That's what courage is, he told her, being afraid but doing what's right anyway. Faith helped him sit up, supporting him as he took small sips of broth. We've lost time. Thomas and his men could be anywhere. We're close to Helena now, Preston assured her. Another day's ride once I'm strong enough. It took 2 more days before Preston could travel. During that time, their bond deepened through conversation and shared silence. Faith found herself telling him things she'd never shared with anyone, her dreams of writing, her frustration with the restrictive expectations placed on women of her station, her longing for a life of meaning rather than mere social standing. Preston listened, encouraged, and shared his own hopes for the future. The store in Hope Springs was just the beginning. He envisioned building something lasting in this untamed territory. A ranch, perhaps, or a larger mercantile business as the territory grew. There's opportunity here for those willing to work and treat people fairly, he explained. Not the kind of business your father conducts, but honest enterprise that helps build communities. By the time they resumed their journey, Faith had come to a realization that both thrilled and terrified her. She was falling in love with this frontier shopkeeper. A man as different from the suitors of her Boston life as the wild Montana landscape was from the manicured gardens of Beacon Hill. They reached Helena without incident, finding the federal marshal's office in the growing territorial capital. Marshal James Harrington was skeptical at first, but the evidence Faith provided was irrefutable. The letters clearly documented a conspiracy involving her father's firm and multiple government officials. This is enough to bring charges, Harrington confirmed after examining the documents. But you understand what this means, Miss Foster. You'll need to testify against your own family. Faith straightened her shoulders, feeling Preston's supportive presence beside her. I understand completely, Marshal. I've already lost my family. They disowned me the moment I threatened to expose their crimes. The marshal arranged protective custody for Faith while telegrams were sent and warrants prepared. Preston stayed in Helena, renting rooms at a modest boarding house near the marshal's office. For 3 weeks, they existed in a strange limbo, their journey complete but their future uncertain. On a crisp autumn evening, they walked along the edge of town, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. Preston had been uncharacteristically quiet all day. What happens after the trial? He finally asked. Will you return to Boston? Faith stopped walking, turning to face him. There's nothing for me in Boston anymore. My family has made that clear. And out here? Preston's voice held a note of vulnerability she'd never heard before. What's out here for you? Faith took a deep breath, gathering her courage. That depends on you, Preston Steele. His eyes widened slightly. On me. These past weeks have changed me, she admitted. I'm not the same woman who stumbled into your store that night. I've found something I never knew was missing: purpose, strength, and... She hesitated, then finished softly, love. Preston stepped closer, taking her hands in his. When your family called you lost, they couldn't have been more wrong, he said, his voice husky with emotion. I knew from that first moment that you'd been found your courage, found your true north. He smiled, bringing her hands to his lips, and maybe found me in the process. Is that your roundabout way of saying you love me too? Faith asked, her heart pounding. Instead of answering with words, Preston lowered his head and kissed her, a gentle meeting of lips that quickly deepened into something more powerful. Faith responded with all the passion she'd kept contained during their journey, wrapping her arms around his neck as he pulled her close. When they finally separated, both breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Faith Foster. I think I've loved you since you woke up in my storeroom and immediately worried about your horse and saddlebag. Faith laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. And I love you despite the fact that you cut my hair and made me ride astride in trousers. You looked beautiful even then, he assured her. You always do. The trial came in early spring of 1876. Faith testified with quiet dignity, presenting the evidence against her father, brother, and their associates. The scandal rocked Boston society and the halls of government. Thomas Harding and his men were arrested for attempted murder, and Faith's family faced financial ruin and social disgrace. When it was over, Faith stood on the courthouse steps beside Preston, feeling strangely hollow. Justice had been served, but at tremendous personal cost. Regrets? Preston asked, noting her expression. Faith shook her head. Only that it came to this, that they chose corruption over decency. Not everyone gets to choose their family, Preston said, slipping his arm around her waist. But we get to choose who we become. They married the following week in a small ceremony at Helena's newly built church. Marshall Harrington stood as witness, along with a few friends Preston had made during their stay. Faith wore a simple blue dress rather than traditional white, a symbol of the new life she was embracing. As spring turned to summer, they returned to Hope Springs. The town welcomed Preston back with enthusiasm and accepted Faith as one of their own once they heard a carefully edited version of her story. The general store flourished under their joint management, with Faith introducing books and educational materials alongside the practical goods. By autumn, they had purchased land outside town to build their home and eventually a small ranch. Faith discovered a talent for breeding horses, while Preston expanded the mercantile business to serve the growing number of settlements in the region. Letters occasionally arrived from Boston news of her father's reduced circumstances, her mother's social ostracism, her brother's legal troubles. Faith read them with diminishing interest, feeling disconnected from that former life. Any word from your family? Preston would sometimes ask when he saw her with a letter. Nothing important, Faith would reply. They still don't understand why I did what I did. Do you think they ever will? Faith would consider this, watching the sunset from their porch or the glow of lamplight on their kitchen table. Perhaps not. They still think I'm the one who's lost. Preston would always smile at this, pulling her into his arms. Then they're the ones who are truly lost. You've been found all along. And in those moments, with his heart beating steady against her ear and their future spreading before them like the vast Montana sky, Faith knew with absolute certainty that he was right. Her family had called her lost, but in losing everything she'd once valued, she had found what truly mattered: truth, purpose, and a love worth any sacrifice. 5 years after arriving in Hope Springs, Faith stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching Preston teach their 3-year-old daughter to ride her first pony. Little Emma squealed with delight as her father led the gentle animal around the corral, her dark curls bouncing with each step. A letter had arrived that morning. Her father had died, leaving what remained of his fortune to Faith's brother. There was no mention of Faith herself, as if she had never existed. Preston looked up, catching her eye across the distance. Even now, after all they'd been through, the connection between them remained unbreakable. He smiled, that same warm smile that had greeted her when she stumbled into his store half dead with exhaustion and fear. Faith smiled back, tucking the letter into her pocket. It no longer had the power to hurt her. She had found her true home, her true purpose, her true love, and in the end, that was all that really mattered.